Guys, it's the last day of the Vegas trip, and so far we've run really well, winning 3 out of 4 sessions, even without the best of play. So hopefully on this last day we can get one more winning session in. Good afternoon, guys. I don't have a tripod, so this camera is sitting on the ice thing you get in hotels. Today we're going to the Wynn once again. I'm going to pick up George at some point. As always, we hope for a win. I mean, I say that all the time, but like, when would I ever hope for a loss? So wish us luck. Alright, we're here with George. Hopefully we have another winning session today. Gonna buy for the 2-5. We're playing the 2-5, buying in for 1500. You know the drill. In this first hand, I've got Queen Jack offsuit in the hijack. There's an early position limp. I make it $20 and I get 3 callers, the small blind, the big blind, and the limper. So we're going to a flop 4 ways. It comes down jack high, guys. 10-7 jack rainbow. We've got top pair with an okay kicker and some backdoor opportunities. The player in the small blind is first to act and he leads out here for $25. Usually when someone bets small without the betting lead, they have some kind of weak top pair, but I kind of sort of have a middling top pair, so don't really know what to make of this. The big blind calls, the early position player calls, and here I would like to thin the fields, but I think raising here with Queen Jack is just a little bit overplaying my hand, so I just make the call here. The turn's the ace of clubs, which I actually think is a pretty good card for us, although we don't exactly know where we're at, because not only will a king give us the nuts, but we also can rep this card better than anyone else in this hand. I can have all the really strong hands, whereas my opponents can't really have those, except for maybe the small blind, but given the way he played, I just don't think he's super strong. He checks, the big blind checks, and the early position player checks, so I could very likely be good here, but we do want to thin out the field and potentially get value if the small blind did have a jack, so I put out a bet here of $75. This should do the trick. The small blind ends up calling and everyone else folds, so we're now heads up. The river is the 7 of clubs, so we are now chopping with any Jack X type hands because we'd have jacks, 7s with the ace kicker. We're kind of certain where we're at here. My opponent checked to me, and it says I checked back, but looking back, I think this is 100% a situation where I should try to bet him off of a chop. I mean, he's super face up given the way he played, and I could definitely rep the ace. I bet the turn. I could definitely have some ace highs on the flop with like a backdoor or like, you know, ace king, ace queen, something like that. So I definitely should be betting here, and I think it was a mistake. He says your ace is good once I check back, and I say I have a jack, and lo and behold, guys, we are chopping against King Jack offsuit. My favorite hand, Jack King off. Unfortunately, we feel like we lost this hand, even though I technically did win some money. But I thought this was an interesting one. We're going to move on to the next hand. I've got 5-4 of clubs on the button. Not a hand I'd normally play, but when I see that there are 2 limps to me and I'm in position at a passive table, I decided I'm going to limp here because I think I'll get away with it enough of the time, and I'm happy to go to a multi-way limped pot with these kind of hands. So the small blind folds, the big blind checks his option. We are going 4 ways to a flop. It is deuce 4-3 with 2 diamonds, guys. We've got top pair with 5-4, an open-ended straight draw, and some backdoor flush opportunities for what it's worth. The player in under the gun decides to bet out for 15 here. The player in +2 calls, and I decide here I'm going to put in a raise. We could potentially win the hand outright. We could potentially thin out the field. I don't have a super strong hand, and it's no longer going to be top pair on the turn. So I'm going to try to get my opponents off their hands right now and try to rep something strong. Only the player in +2 calls and the others fold. So we're going to a turn card, heads up. It is the king of clubs, putting a second club on the board. So we now have a flush draw, but other than that, doesn't do much for us. The player in under the gun +2 checks to me, and I decide I'm going to continue with the aggression here. We're going to continue our story. So I make it 135 here, pretty much just repping like a set. He calls fairly quickly, so we could potentially be in trouble. But the river is the ace of clubs, guys. The backdoor flush comes through. We now have a 5-high flush for what it's worth, and my opponent rips it. He doesn't have that much left, though. It's 262 into a pot of 457. I'm going to just snap call here, which I do. And guys, I can't make this up. He shows us 5-4 offsuit as well, but that is not going to win it. He rivers the straight, we river the flush. It's a perfect card to get all the money in. So yeah, we both ended up having the same hand all the way through until the river. We won a nice one, and it was a fun hand considering it was a limp spot with a hand I normally wouldn't play. And after not too long of a session at the Wynn, the table got pretty tough, and I'd say there were maybe like 4 other regs at the table besides us. We decided to head out and find a different place to play. There were some more hands from this session, but they weren't terribly interesting, and there are a ton of interesting hands coming up from the next session. After all was said and done, we booked a small loss at the Wynn of $80. I don't remember if George won this session, but I believe he did because I think he buys in for 1,000, and it looks like he has more than that here. Where are we, George?
No, Aria.
After grabbing dinner really quickly, George and I head to Aria to play our next session. Immediately when I sit down at my table, I see a player who I saw in the first session at Aria for this trip. His name was Chris, and I remember he asked about the vlog last time and he took an interest in it. He was a very friendly and outgoing player, definitely a fun person to have at the table. There was also another player named Yury from Belarus, and he also asked about the vlog this session. Here they get involved in a hand where Yury raises Chris on the river all in for a large amount on a double paired board, basically repping a full house, and Yury starts giving Chris some fun table talk, and it definitely makes for a funny interaction.
I'm gonna coach you. You are good enough to fold the boat with the 5. You have a boat with the 5. You're good enough to fold it. That's all I'm gonna say. Turning a little bit. I feel like you just have a straight. He is good enough to fold the boat with the 5. This is a regular 2-5 or 2-5-10 game. People know what they're doing. They can fold smaller boats. The all-in bets on the river. I will show my hand in the end, whether you call me or you fold. But I will only show my hand. If you fold, you must show yours.
Where are you at?
Right? I'm not gonna show you my hand if you just fold. And if you
Give me a $100 rebate and I'll fold.
What's a $100 rebate?
Like, give me back one of the black ones.
No,
How do you
not
run
allowed.
that?
Excuse me, this is not a home game, it's a casino game.
It's in the game.
That's
It's in the game.
impossible. So
Essentially, you
How about, since you're a nice guy, how about you rebate me a quarter into your own stack? I mean, you've been paying a quarter.
I just want to be respectful to the casino rules, so I'm not gonna answer to that. But normally, I would do a lot of different things. Yeah. So yeah.
God, you're just gonna make me so sick if you show me a fucking ball.
Show me a 5. Show us your hand. Actually, why don't you show us
Show
your
me
hand?
one. Show me one.
no,
What?
you're not
What?
allowed.
What do you mean? We're heads up. What's the difference?
Well, he can show though, right?
Yeah,
I got no
allowed to show
answer.
hands
Ante.
heads up. That's not a rule.
They are all in and they want to show car, is okay?
Yeah, I'm allowed to show cards heads up. That's,
Not allowed here.
there was a guy earlier who showed cards heads up.
I just want to
That's
clarify.
the
The guy earlier showed cards heads up.
Let's just ask the rules of the game. I went gentleman bet. I went all in. The gentleman, I have no action. I'm all in. Can the gentleman show his hand right now?
I mean, that.
Yes, sir. We cannot. Okay, so that's it.
The online guy out about it. He had both
Listen,
his
the
hands
room says no showing. We're not gonna show. We're gonna be respectful to the Aria poker rule. I'm all in. It's on you, sir.
I mean, what'd you raise? Like 8-7?
If you can't beat A7,
So sick.
check my
Would you call a jam if I had a jam the turn?
You know what? I think
This is a whole different-
I think I said already too much. I'm gonna shut up right now. You're welcome. Here's a pre tip: whether I win or I lose. Okay. You're welcome.
Dealer. You're gonna have to call the clock on
With
me,
the
dude. I
clock,
can't
please.
fucking deal with
I
it.
will not call the clock on you. You can call the clock on yourself.
You already
I'm not
called-
gonna
you already
call
called the
myself.
clock.
I'm saying
Yeah.
you can. I'm fair. 100%. Can I at least get a
Action
countdown?
on him.
Can I at least see a time?
We'll get a minute and then
I just want to see it. Can I see it? Like the timer was
Got a
going.
black chip down here. Okay.
Thank you. Sorry. That's fair. I understand. It's fair.
Take your time. It's a cash
Can I get a
game.
minute? Okay. It's such a perfect bluff too. I know you're capable of this shit. That's what I hate about it.
I take it.
You're
as,
also that asshole who could have a
I
7
take
here.
I take it as a compliment. You know, if your opponent is thinking hard, whether you're right or wrong, it's already a good thing.
Yeah, but it's obvious. I played my hand face up. Of course you don't.
Hey, listen. I take it as a compliment.
You at least give her a quarter.
Bluff. Show the bluff, Yury. Show the bluff.
I had it.
Nice hand, sir. Nice fold. Chris makes the correct decision to fold the smaller boat. Yury decided to put him to the test, and luckily Chris was able to get away from it. So far, it looks like it's going to be a fun session. Pretty early into the session, I get aces and ace queen and win a couple really small pots with some aggression pre-flop. It's not a huge amount, but it's good to start the session off on a good note.
I raised 40. Just call and straddle next time. As long as people
175.
Absolutely.
175.
Here you go. You see what happened? It backfired.
Well, Doge guy came for action. Get the phone out.
170? No. Absolutely not.
Now, just a quick heads up for the rest of the hands. I wasn't able to get that much footage of them for reasons, but I was able to get some just still images of them. It's not as engaging, and I know it's not as fun to watch a vlog without the video, but I promise you guys these next several hands are going to be really good, and these are potentially the best hands of all the trip in my opinion. So stay around, especially for the last hand, because that one is definitely the most exciting. Alright guys, let's get back into the hands. For this one, I'm on the button with 10-7 of hearts, and I don't have the pre-flop action, but it's heads up on the flop with me and Yury, and I believe there's about 45 or 50 in the pot, so it probably went Yury limping in the low jack, me raising, and then him calling, something like that. The flop comes down 7-6-5 all clubs. We've got a weak top pair here on a very wet board. Yury checks to me, and I decided to bet here. 35.
35.
Call 35.
The turn card is the 7 of spades, so we now have trips, which makes us a little more comfortable. The board's still wet, but the chances he flopped a monster, very low, and we might have heard from him by now. So when he checks it over to me again, I am going to once again put out a bet, a little bit bigger this time. 85. The river's the 9 of clubs, putting a 4th club on the board and putting out 4 to a straight. Not the card I wanted to see, and I'm about ready to fold if he bets and check if he checks it over to me. So he checks, and I have a very easy check back with trips. So that's what I do.
Check.
I have trips.
You check?
I check, yeah.
I have the same hand.
Ooh, okay.
Nice.
Alright, well
You guys
played.
are both suited in the wrong way. Dogs.
Terrible.
Say your name one more time.
I'm Yury.
Yury.
Y-U-R-Y.
Why? Okay, perfect. Yeah, Yury. We happen to have the same hand, so we're going to chop this one up. Not the most interesting hand, but the next one is a little bit more interesting. I am in the under the gun straddle for $10. I've got Jack 7 offsuit here. Folds all the way to the button. It's Yury. He decides to just call here. The blinds limp in as well, and I check my option. The flop comes down. King, 10, queen, 2 diamonds, guys. We've got an open-ended straight draw. We're 1 card away from the nuts. The blinds check, and given that we're having fun at the table, I decide to get a tiny bit out of line in this hand. I bet $15, which isn't that bad yet, but we will see as the hand progresses that I do a little more than that. Yury calls on the button, and the small blind calls as well, so still 3 ways to a turn card. It's a 7 of spades, which gives us bottom pair, but isn't all that interesting. My opponent should still be ahead of me if they were on the flop. But guys, once the small blind checks to me, I decide to keep firing for $50 here, knowing full well that this is not the correct play. At this point, I fully decided I'm going to just try to get my opponents to fold and then show the bluff. It would be fun to get them to fold to Jack 7 offsuit when I'm in the straddle. So that was fully my intention. I don't really get super out of line very often. Of course, I'm not planning to put my whole stack in, but I'm willing to put in a raise or two if I need to try to win the hand and give up if things get a little too crazy. But anyways, I bet $50. Yury ends up calling on the button and the small blind folds. So we are now heads up to a river card. I'm ready to fire on pretty much any card. The river is a pretty interesting one. It's the Jack of Diamonds. So it completes the flush. It puts 4 to a straight out there, which I think are the 2 more important things. And of course, it does give me 2 pair, but that shouldn't really change much. If my opponent has like a 1 pair type hand that he's just going to fold to any bet, it doesn't really matter that I'm getting this Jack to give me 2 pair. Once again, I am just trying to win this hand and get my opponents to fold. I continue with the bet of 135, which is probably what I'd bet if I had an ace here. And luckily, we do not get a snap call. Yury goes into the tank, and it looks pretty clear that he's not planning on raising. Seems genuine. And he starts going on a monologue. And in the middle of his monologue, he mentions what he has. And guys, you will not believe this. he says that he has Jack 7. So I know now that we are chopping, and this is just an insane tank from him. I mean, all of my bluffs get there, except for the fact that I don't quite have one of those bluffs that get there, even though everything just gets there with the Jack of Diamonds. Pretty insane. He just has a bluff catcher, and he has to know it. And he says at some point that if he was disciplined, he should fold. But for the sake of the vlog, he will call. And he actually does call. We both show that we had Jack 7, and we chop. This is probably one of the craziest chop hands I've ever been involved in. The board is so freaking wet, everything gets there, and I just flat out wanted to just win this hand so I could show the bluff. And this is why I wanted to show the previous hand where we had 10-7, even though it wasn't that interesting, because we both had 10-7 and we both chopped, and then very shortly after, we both have Jack 7 and we chop. Anyways, that was a fun little hand. We have even more fun hands coming up in this session. I am in the straddle once again for this next hand, but there is a double straddle in Under the Gun +1 to $20. I happen to get King Queen offsuit, pretty good hand in the straddle. The cutoff limps, Yury is on the button, he limps as well. Once the blinds fold, action is on me. I'm definitely raising it up. I bump it up to 110. The double straddler calls, and Yury calls on the button. So 3 ways to a flop. It comes down deuce 5-6 with 3 spades. We've got the king high flush draw here and 2 overs on a very low board. I am first to act, and I'm going to put out a c-bet here. I make it 125, don't need to make it too big. The player in the double shadow folds, and only the button calls. The turn card is the 10 of spades, guys. We make the king high flush. Almost have the nuts here. I decided to check here. I imagine my reasoning was something along the lines of it might be hard to get value from really anything but a decently strong flush, and I also believe Yury is more than capable of firing here with worse, so we're going to give him the opportunity to do so. He ends up betting 350. I pretend to think about it for a little bit, and then I end up just flatting. The river card is the 3 of spades, so now there's a flush on the board, only 10 high with a lot of low cards, and I'm not 100% sure what to be doing here. I ended up checking, which I don't hate and I don't love. It does give some complete nothing hands the opportunity to bluff, but at the same time, I probably should be going for value with my king high flush. So yeah, not really sure. It's also against Yury, who, as we know, isn't afraid to make moves, but also will call even on really scary boards. So yeah, maybe I should have just gone for value. Let me know what you guys think of this, but I checked. Yury looks at my stack, thinks for a bit, and he says he doesn't think that I'll fold after the check call on the turn. So he says he plays the board, checks back, and of course we're good here once I show my hand. We pick up a nice little pot here. I wish he had taken a stab. I would have obviously snap called, but cannot complain about winning a decent sized pot. Eventually this table ends up breaking, and I get moved to a new table and get seated directly to the right of a very talkative and very funny Vietnamese man who stacks his chips like this. I wouldn't even call this a stack of chips, it's just a pile. It seemed like no one at the table really wanted him to fix his chip stack, and neither did I, because this was the kind of guy who gave a lot of action. He was willing to get into a lot of hands, and for that reason, no one wanted to kill this guy's vibe.
Then you join the right table. Action, action, action. This table, a lot of action. Okay? I just called to say I love you, say hello. Yeah.
After playing several hands that weren't very interesting, I end up with pocket 3s in the hijack. I noticed the player to my right put out $2, and this made me think I was in the big blind since I was just kind of on autopilot, so I put out a $5 chip. It turns out I wasn't in the big blind, and the under the gun player had actually limped. Action ends up folding to me, and because I put out a $5 chip, I called. I don't know what happened with the person to my right. I think he took back his $2. But anyways, the cutoff calls as well, the small blind calls, and the big blind checks. So we're going to a flop 5 ways. It comes down deuce 3 4. I've got middle set. The blinds check, the under the gun player bets 15, and I'm obviously going to put out a raise here on a board texture like this. I make it $45, obviously wishing that I hadn't made the mistake pre-flop since the pot would be bigger here. But given the hand's super multi-way, this might actually work to my favor. The cutoff ends up calling, the big blind calls, and the under the gun player who initially bet also calls. So we are still 4 ways going to a turn card. It's the queen of spades, shouldn't really be scared of anything here. The flush didn't come in, and this is just a random high card. The big blind checks again, and the under the gun player wants to bet again even though I had raised. He leads for $65, which is a very small bet, And I'm kind of confused as to what this means. It looks like he probably doesn't have a super strong hand but wants to get to a river cheaply, so I'm obviously planning on a raise here. I ask how much my opponents have behind. The cutoff has about 2,400, the big blind has 1,800, and the under the gun player has 2K, so we're all playing very, very deep here. Could get us into trouble, but I still think I should be ahead most of the time. So I decide to raise it up. I make it 165 here. We gotta deny equity from some maybe one pair with the straight draw type hands that my opponents could have, especially given how multi-way we are. The cutoff gives up and folds, and both of the other players still call. So we are now 3 ways to a river card, and it comes down the ace of spades. Not a card I'm very happy to see, guys. Now any 5 makes a straight. And given how my opponents played it, I think it's very likely they have something like that. So I'm kind of tilted at the run out here, and I'm fully expecting one of my opponents to bet. The big blind, though, checks once again, and the under the gun player, he does not stop leading out, guys. He makes it 425 this time, a much more sizable bet. And at this point, I think it's pretty obvious we are not good here. I make a pretty frustrated fold, and the big blind ends up calling. The player in under the gun shows King 5 offsuit for a straight, and the player in the big blind shows Queen 5 of diamonds also for a straight. They're gonna chop this one up. A bad run out for a set is one thing, especially when I was hoping that I'd make a lot of money in a multi-way hand with a set, but the thing that actually bothered me was that I didn't even intend to limp, and it just was a mistake due to the person to my right putting out $2. Even if I had raised, though, there's still a chance that the other players would have called anyways, and maybe I could have lost even more money, who knows. But I'm still up about 1K, so definitely no need to complain. Nice hand. Nice hand, guys. Good, I had a set. It's time to get revenge, but before we do, let's check back in with the guy from before.
3 wins. Fair wins.
Fold.
Fair wins.
You can show or fold.
So?
I've never.
Yeah, of course. I have a 5. That's why I call you.
I've got pocket kings in the small blind. We're playing 5-handed. The player in the hijack and cutoff limp. The button folds. I'm going to bump it up here to $30, and I get called by both the big blind and the limpers. So 4 ways to a flop of 8, 9, 7 rainbow. This is one of the worst possible boards for a hand like mine and for the pre-flop aggressor's range. So I decide to check it over to my opponents being first to act. The big blind here decides to bet $40. The hijack calls and the cutoff folds. I hate this flop, but I can't fold to a 1/3 pot size bet with pocket kings, so I decide to make the call, but not feeling super happy about it. The turn comes the ace of diamonds, and this might actually be a good card, because if my opponents had top pair on the flop, they no longer have that, and they might slow down, and I won't have to face a bet. So I check once again. I don't see any reason to be betting here. The big blind now decides to check as well, so maybe the ace did scare him a bit, and the hijack checks as well. So I feel pretty confident that I'm ahead now. I don't expect 2 pair or better to ever be checking on the turn, especially given how wet the board is. And with the ace coming out, I think they should go for value against any ace-x hands I should have. So we're just hoping for a clean river to get the showdown. It comes down the 6 of spades. There's now 4 to a straight on the board. Either of my opponents could have a straight very easily given how they played. Again, no reason to bet here. We're just praying to get to showdown. I check, the big blind checks as well, and the hijack bets. He makes it 135 here, and I am almost certain I'm behind. I'm just going to let it go here, especially with the big blind left to act. I fold my kings, the big blind folds as well, and the hijack actually ends up showing that he had 10-6 of clubs for a flopped straight. So he played it a little tricky on the turn. If the river had come clean and then the hijack bet into both of us, I just maybe would have made the call. I don't think so, but who knows. So maybe the scary river might have saved us some money. But we lose with the set. We lose with kings. Even at a good table where there are a lot of action players, even though we're 5-handed, we can't seem to get much going. So session is slowing down a bit. And of course, I don't particularly enjoy playing short-handed. So if I'm being honest, a big part of me just wants to cash out and finish up the session and just finish the trip on a win. But no matter how many times I thought that during the session, I just kept playing. We were here late at night. Georgia and I came here after the win to grind, and this was going to be the last session of the trip, so the other part of me just wanted to squeeze out as much value from this 5-handed table as I could. Except for this next hand, we're actually four-handed now, someone left. And also at some point in the session, the fun player who I mentioned earlier also left. Unfortunately, we did not get involved in a good hand against him, but at the very least, he decided to flip for 500 with someone just randomly as he was leaving, so we got a little content out of it.
Don't worry, I'm coming back tomorrow.
I can't believe you're leaving. I thought you wanted this shit back. I can't believe you're leaving.
I cannot believe it.
I cannot believe you're leaving.
Flip it, $500. Okay? Everyone fold, please. Next hand.
So I know it's firing him up.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's do it. Between me and you, $500. Next hand.
You're too lucky. I can't.
Come on,
This is a
man.
poker player.
Go on.
Good luck, all in.
All right. Is everybody okay with that?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so I'm just gonna deal those two in a flip.
Stays? Monkey stays?
Yeah, of course. Oh, looks like a big call. I have ACES. Yeah. From nothing. Deuce.
Deuce? Get this fuck out.
Deuce never lose, baby.
Can I get a nickel for the rig?
Huh?
I'm in the small blind with Jack 10 offsuit. The cutoff raises to $30, and even though I normally play a pretty narrow range in the blinds and tend to play them more aggressively, I just called here because we're four-handed and I think my opponents are going to be raising with a lot of different types of hands. I think this is totally playable here, out of position. The flop comes down 10-3 deuce with two hearts. Pretty good flop for us. We've got an okay top pair. I obviously check to my opponent. He puts out a c bet of 35. I make the call. Turns the 10 of spades. We now have trips, guys, feeling much more comfortable here. If he's got a 10 as well, it's just going to be a cooler. I check again. Maybe you could make a case for betting since maybe I want to rep this when I have some kind of bluff or something. And my opponent's going to check back a lot of like ace highs, king highs, and stuff like that. But I decided to just check here. Not really sure, to be honest. The cutoff bet, $65 this time. It's only a half pot size bet once again. And I do want to go for some value here. But honestly, looking back, maybe this is overplaying my hand. I check raise to 175 here. And I don't really know what kind of bluffs I'd have in this spot. So I don't know. Maybe if I thought an opponent was like over bluffing here, I might raise with like garbage. But honestly, I don't really know if I'm super balanced in this spot. Whatever, the cutoff calls quickly, so he's got to have at least something here. We're just hoping for a non-heart river. The river comes down, the jack of diamonds. So we're feeling extra comfortable here, only losing to pocket jacks. I put out a bet of 325 here. I think I could check to potentially get some flush draws to try to bet here, but I think it's better to just go for value. My opponent's probably decently strong since he called the raise on the turn pretty quickly, and if he has ace 10 here, you know, maybe an overpair or something like that, I think he's just going to have to call this off. There's not really a decision to be made. This was also the same player who had king 5 in that hand where I flopped a set and the other two players rivered a straight. My opponent does not call. He actually decides to shove for $900 total, and obviously I snap call knowing that I'm good, and I believe I heard my opponent say I have a boat, and then I said me too, but it turns out he actually said, do you have a boat? So I said yes, and then I showed my hand because my hand was obviously good here, and he mucks. So we'll never know what he had, but it seems like he was just trying to make a move based on how he was talking. We win a very nice pot and get a little revenge for the hand where he and the other player chopped with the straight.
And you have them covered.
Yeah.
Big chips on top of it. Thank you.
And with that, guys, we're moving on to the very last hand of the session. We are still four-handed. I've got pocket aces in the cutoff. I open to $20. The player in the small blind, who's the player from the last hand, 3 bets to $45, so very small 4-bet here. The big blind folds, action's back on me. I'm obviously 4-betting with this hand, and I decide to make it 115. I don't know if that's a little too small or not, but since my opponent raised small, I guess I just didn't want to over-raise here and maybe get him to fold. But he ends up snap calling here. The flop comes down 9 king 10 with 2 clubs. I have no clubs in my hand. This is a pretty wet board. He could easily have maybe like king 10 here, potentially 10s or 9s. I don't expect he'd have kings just snap calling pre-flop. I think he'd at least think about 5-betting, but you never know. He could also have something like 10-9. I don't know. He decides to lead out here for $240. So basically a pot size bet. I have no idea what this means. Obviously it's a very confusing and weird situation, but there's no way I'm folding. I make the call. The turn comes down, the 6 of hearts should be a blank. He decides to continue betting, this time for a more reasonable size of 330. Obviously nothing has really changed here, but it's just weird for him to have taken the betting lead in this 4-bet pot, and it's also 4-handed, which maybe I'm not the best at navigating. And I'm also aware that we're both playing deep and the pot's starting to get big, and if I call here, we're both going to have just about a pot size bet left behind, and I'm potentially going to have to face an all-in on the river. There's not a single card that could come on the river that would make me feel more comfortable with my hand. Only ones that could just be a blank and, you know, make me at least feel like I can catch a bluff. So I think about it for a while, but ultimately I decide I have to call again. Obviously I call, otherwise this hand wouldn't be in the vlog. The river, guys, comes down the 4 of spades. So the front door flush misses. Obviously, we're not super comfortable here with aces, and I'm just praying we get to showdown. I don't know what my opponent's playing like this with, but of course, guys, he puts me to the test, and he shoves for 1330 into a pot of just around that same amount. So now I'm in a really gross spot, at least in my opinion. I had mixed opinions when I shared this hand with other people, but there were just so many different weird hands that he could have. I mean, he could have a set. He could have 10-9, king 10, king 9. Yes, I know you guys are like, why would someone call 4-bet with that? You're crazy. But this guy absolutely could have plenty of hands that probably I would be surprised by too. I had just stacked him in the previous hand. He had rebought for 2k. The max at Aria is 1.5k, but no one at the table minded, so it didn't matter. And there were just so many factors that went into this. It's 4-handed. He like snap calls my 4-bet, which seems like he probably wouldn't do with a very strong hand, but at the same time, you never know. And then he just leads out for pot on the flop and then continues betting all the way through and puts me all in. On top of all this, I had mentioned before that I was contemplating leaving at some point since we were shorthanded and I was happy to just take a profit. And with how big this hand got, this would absolutely like define my session. It was a ridiculous size pot, especially if I were to call here. And even though I know I shouldn't let this cloud my judgment, I should just try to make the best decision possible, it's hard not to think about that, especially when I want to end the trip on a win and have a good session, and I was up so much, and this one decision could absolutely change that. Calling and being wrong would be absolutely devastating to my stack and to the session, and folding and being wrong would be very bad as well. I was in the tank for a very, very long time at this point, and ultimately I just start thinking about what combos of hands he could have here. I think ace king is very likely. I could actually see him snap calling a 4-bet with that and then playing it like this. Maybe an overplay from him, even though it's obviously a strong hand. Someone in my position could very well be beating that. He could also have something like queen jack, which I didn't mention before, for a straight. Looking back, I just think it would be ridiculous for someone to flop a really strong hand and then just lead out for pot. So I think this is supposed to be a call here, guys. Ultimately, after a very long time of tanking and being in a very gross spot, a player decides to call the clock, and about 10 seconds later, I made up my mind and I toss in a chip to make the call. The small blind is pretty quiet for a while and then eventually says, "Good call." I show my hand, and once I do that, he holds up his cards to the dealer really quickly and says flush draw, and then he mucks. I believe I saw the 4 of clubs. I don't know what the other card was, but we end up very luckily winning this hand, and it happened to be the very last hand. One thing I didn't mention was that this player was from Texas, because I heard him talking to another player next to him who was also from Texas. So that plays a factor in this too, along with the fact that obviously he played very loose. Obviously he's not afraid to make moves here, but at the same time, guys, being in the moment, it's a lot harder to make an objective decision like this and call off a huge bet like this when you're not really sure where you're at. We end up scooping a massive, massive pot. My opponent ends up leaving. He had had enough for the day, and he didn't seem tilted or anything. He took it like a champ, so good on him. And he definitely put me in a very tough spot here. Let me know what you guys' thoughts on this was. I thought it was close, but I don't really know, to be honest. And because he left, the table ended up breaking. No one wanted to play 3-handed, so this did end up forcing me to finish my session on a very, very big win. It just so happened that George and Chris were leaving at pretty much exactly the same time, so it was just the perfect time to end the session. One of the floormen happened to be near the table during the river for that hand, and he later told me it was one hell of a call considering all the possible hands that could be beating me, so that was nice to hear from him. Shout out to the floorman, I appreciate that. Shout out to the Aria staff, the Aria poker room. It was definitely the star of this trip. I can confidently say that Aria and the Wynn are pretty much tied for my favorite places to play in Vegas at the moment.
5, 1, 20, 40, 60.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.
Thank you. Thank you.
Guys, it is now 5:57 a.m. So basically the story is we left the Wynn because there were like 6 regs at the table including us, and they were all pretty good. We didn't want to have to deal with that. And then we decided to check out Aria. If it weren't for George, I wouldn't have stayed up late and played another session. I would have convinced myself to go home early and sleep because I had been sleeping so late. And I'm so glad I didn't, because we came to Aria. The first table was definitely a lot of action. Moved to another table because our game broke. There was a Vietnamese man next to me talking nonstop. He had his chips in a pile, not stacked, so no one could really see how much he had. And then the guy in seat 9, just absolutely wild. And there were just so many, it's kind of loud in here, so many layers to the hand. Like, I had just stacked him so he could just be making a move there. Anyways, regardless of what happened, that guy had a lot of heart to put me in that spot, and there were a lot of like live read / table dynamic things going on. On one hand, it was like he had let out before and he did have draws, but then oftentimes he just had a hand at some point. I don't really know what to say about that. I'm still kind of like Also, he just got on his phone afterwards after he shoved, and I was like, what do I make of that? Is he trying to look relaxed? But then I've also tried to make that read other times and they actually did have a hand. So I was just like, I had no idea what to do. And normally when I'm in a tough spot, I'm just kind of sitting there not reacting much, but being in this spot for like what would be a 3.9k pot-ish, which it did end up being if I were to call, and I was just like, what the f do I do here? Absolutely ridiculous. Obviously good content, 0 complaints. I have nothing, absolutely nothing to complain about. I won the hand. It's good content. We had a good session. The only thing left is that I don't really have sleep, and I think I'm walking the wrong way. Where am I going? Okay guys, I'm going to end the vlog here. You guys have an amazing night, and I'll see you in the next vlog. Peace. And before we finish the vlog, I thought I'd show you guys the stats for this specific poker trip. We won just under $5,000 over a course of just under 40 hours of play. Obviously, this is a very small sample size, and the vast majority of my profit was from this session. So if I took away this session, my hourly would have been something more of like $40-ish. But obviously, I'm super happy about the last session and with the trip as a whole. Didn't play super well, but we ran well and had a lot of fun spots, and it made for some good content. Big shout out to George. He had an even crazier story getting to play at the VIP table with some big names. He's a super solid poker player, and he's got a great future in poker ahead of him. And that's going to be it for this vlog, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Big shout out to all the people I met during the trip, and I will see you guys in the next vlog. Peace.